As of April 2023, the global market capitalization of cryptocurrencies was over 1.27 trillion, with Bitcoin being the largest cryptocurrency, followed by Ethereum. While there has been a large drop in global market capitalization over the past year, it appears that cryptocurrency market cap is beginning to rebound. However, as we all know, the cryptocurrency market is highly volatile and its value can fluctuate rapidly. Is the world ready to embrace cryptocurrency like Bitcoin as the main currency of choice? Welcome to This Professional Life, a podcast by Convos Media about trending topics related to all things in the professional services world, from lawyers to accountants and other business-to-business service providers. Before we begin this podcast, please note that the information, opinions, and discussions presented in this podcast are for general informational purposes only and do not constitute legal advice. The views and opinions expressed by the podcast guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy, position, or opinions of the respective employers or other organizations they may be affiliated with. What I wanted to do on today's podcast was dive deep into the legal aspect of cryptocurrency, because with all new things that get introduced to the market, regulation and legal policy follow. Especially when you consider recent scandals like FTX, regulation can often overreach to compensate for a lack of initial oversight. I invited Sam Gabor, lawyer and counsel at one of the largest and oldest law firms in Canada, to provide some legal insight when it comes to the world of cryptocurrency. I got to ask Sam about regulation in Canada, legal considerations for lenders of cryptocurrency projects, legal considerations for investors and depositors of cryptocurrency, and some of his own insights into the future of crypto. Sam is an insolvency, restructuring, and bankruptcy lawyer at Gowlings, Canada, with over 13 years of experience, and has taken a keen interest in cryptocurrency and the metaverse in recent years.
And I actually have a prior focus on intellectual property. I'm also a registered Canadian trademark agent, but I focus primarily on insolvency law now. And over the last year and a half or so, during the pandemic, I started specializing in cryptocurrency, digital assets. The major reason for this was it was a pretty slow period of time for insolvency lawyers during the pandemic. There was about $1 trillion put into the economy by the Canadian government, and businesses just were not failing because they were getting propped up by government money. And I sort of decided, okay, how do I sort of bridge the gap between my intellectual property law practice and my insolvency law practice? And I initially got into the metaverse, and then the metaverse, there's different metaverses where you're buying goods with their in-house token, and then you got to buy those tokens with Ethereum. And then from there, I started learning about cryptocurrency and blockchain, and it just became an exercise of unraveling the onion. And then I just really enjoy crypto and the uncertainty of the law and how it's continually developing every single day. And I think it's a perfect space for what I do and what kind of services I can provide.
From a very high level, what are you seeing in the crypto world from your standpoint? What are some of the trends that you're noticing that are happening, aside from, some of these, I would say, blow-ups or investor losses in the crypto world in the recent debacles?
Yeah, so since June 2022, the crypto market has really taken a downward slide. It really started with Terra Luna collapsing, which is a stable coin that was pegged to the US dollar using algorithms. And it collapsed. It then had a cascading effect on Three Arrows Capital, which was the largest crypto hedge fund in the world that had a huge stake in Terra Luna. So it collapsed. And then other parties, major US crypto exchanges like Celsius and Voyager Digital, who had large stakes in Three Arrows Capital, collapsed because their loans that they had lent significant amounts of money to Three Arrows Capital, they collapsed, and then the price of Bitcoin collapsed from there. And then we can talk about FTX after, and then you have the FTX fraud issue and insolvency proceeding in the United States. And that sort of really high level background of the price of Bitcoin collapsing, it's now gone back up considerably over the last few months. And really the current trend now is regulation, enforcement. And it's the securities regulators, specifically in the United States and in other countries, stepping in and essentially regulating through enforcement now. which has created a lot of confusion for crypto companies and exchanges, and is, I think, creating sort of business risk for the whole industry as a whole. And that's sort of the high level, I would say.
Yeah, and that's an interesting regulation through enforcement. That doesn't give a lot of certainty for businesses moving forward in the crypto world, right? Because you never know what the regulators are going to decide is offside and what's onside, right? Like it inherently puts a lot of risk, I assume, for companies
Yeah,
to get in.
yeah. So Coinbase in the United States, which is a publicly traded company, which had regulatory approval to become a publicly traded company, got a Wells notice from the U.S. Federal Securities Commission saying they're going to have enforcement action taken against them for certain trading practices. And their response is, well, we've been asking for rules and regulations and for months and years now, and now we're getting hit with a Wells notice, and they're really pushing back. So there's a pushback from the crypto industry. But and just so we're clear, I'm not a securities lawyer. I don't do the sort of regulatory side and the solvency lending practice side, but I do follow all the sort of trends that are happening in the crypto industry and what's happening legally. And yeah, there's definitely uncertainty now about what regulators are going to continue to do and what steps they're going to take from an enforcement perspective. And there's a concern that there's government action being taken because of a desire to essentially slow down and prevent the crypto industry from growing. Instead of creating helpful regulations and legislation, it's action through enforcement, which is very difficult to predict and very difficult to respond to and costly, and creates a lot of market irritability with consumers and with current clients.
Can you just quickly explain what a Wells notice is?
It's essentially a notice from the SEC telling a company that they're recommending enforcement action against possible violations. So it's a notice saying, okay, we're potentially taking action against you, so be prepared.
So I want to shift a little bit of focus here, still staying obviously on the topic crypto, but into your realm from a legal perspective. In terms of some of the issues we've seen with crypto investments and some projects that have gone upside down, can you talk a little bit about things like crypto financing? What happens when some of these crypto-based projects fail? Is it very similar to traditional ways of financing and how lenders protect themselves and try to claw some of their money back in failed projects? Maybe go through some of that ecosystem there and how that works in the crypto world.
A crypto project is very similar to any other project from a high level perspective. If you're getting investment that comes in, it could be in fiat currency like Canadian dollars. It could be in crypto where you're doing a DeFi project and you're just working with crypto. And if the project fails, generally people lose their money and you move on. From an investment perspective, if you are an investor and you're investing money in and you want to take security in what the crypto project is doing, right? Your underlying security may not be that great because it just may be software code. It may be whatever underlying assets exist. So generally investing in anything, you're going to want some sort of security, whether it's money, hard assets, real property. And in the crypto space, if you're going to take security in Bitcoin itself, right, you're going to want to have access to whatever Bitcoin that the person is pledging you on. Let's say someone's starting a project and you're going to lend them Bitcoin, or you're going to lend them something else and they're going to give something in exchange, say Bitcoin. You're going to want to ensure that you have control of that Bitcoin so that if the project goes bad, you can enforce your loan, right? So if I'm, let's say, lending just regular Canadian dollars to someone to start a project, I'm going to want to have access to the private wallet potentially of the person pledging the Bitcoin. I may want them to actually transfer the Bitcoin into a private wallet that I'm just going to hold in trust, and we could put it into a custodianship and create a contract which says, okay, if the project fails, I don't get my money back, or if I got to call my loan, I get to pull the Bitcoin. You'll see lenders in the crypto space where they'll lend out hard cash to start a project, and they will take Bitcoin as security, and they'll have agreement which says, okay, if the Bitcoin drops below a certain threshold, you have to actually re-up the Bitcoin that you've put in. Like you've got to put more in to cover the loan that provided to you, right? So those sort of terms and conditions that a lender, if you're investing in a crypto project, need to take if you're taking collateral in Bitcoin, which is outside of what a normal lending relationship would be like. Where if I'm lending a house or I'm lending money as a bank to someone to buy a house, you take a mortgage against the house. It registers in the land title system, and that's how you get your security. So you got to be creative in the lending space if you're dealing with a DeFi project that may have Bitcoin as their asset, essentially.
Right. It's interesting because if you think about and tie it into the metaverse as well, if someone was to get financing to purchase some digital land in the metaverse or to build a digital building in the metaverse, and that project doesn't work out, then as a lender, I guess you could register the loan on like digital property, I guess, almost.
Well, that's
I don't know if
so,
that's been done before.
So I wrote an article about that 2 years ago, which was published. And it's essentially, how do you take security in digital land that's in the metaverse? And essentially there's sort of the framework you got to use is that the digital land remains in the name of the person lending the money. And you've set up, it's almost like a rental relationship with the borrower. And then once the loan is paid in full, the lender is contractually obligated to change the name of the person or to actually transfer it would be an NFT, right? You have to transfer the NFT rights, non-fungible token rights, over to the borrower once the loan's paid in full. And then you can set up certain terms and conditions in your contract which says, like, you're going to use the building for X, or you're going to use it for Y, and you're going to pay me X amount every month. And then the issue is, like, is that a security interest or not, right? Because if it's a security interest and the borrower is, for instance, in Canada, let's say they're in Canada, right? All the personal property security legislation applies, right? And there's a whole bunch of legal uncertainty under PPSA legislation for crypto and NFTs in terms of how do you register a security interest in those? How do you perfect your security interest in an NFT? Because right now, the whole structure of the Personal Property Security Act has NFTs and arguably crypto falling under the definition of intangibles, right? Which is generally not, it wasn't designed for crypto. It was designed for really intellectual property rights, like trademarks, copyrights, patents, the right to sue people, rights under a contract, right? It's not meant for digital assets, which the Canadian court system has said in Quadrigacx, which I'm sure we'll talk about after, that crypto is considered property in Canada, but the PPSA is really lagging behind the sort of the reality of what crypto and digital assets are meant to stand as property.
There seems to be a bit of lag between the legal system and some of these new technologies as they come through, right?
Yeah, and that's not a new thing. That has been happening for decades. It happened with the internet, right? It took a long time for governments to get their heads around, okay, what do we do with the internet? How do we regulate things to an extent, but allowing commercial freedom at the same time? And this isn't a new problem, and generally the legislation's always lagging behind, so you need court cases to step in and sort of fill the gaps based on existing law.
So Sam, when it comes to crypto lending and a lot of the crypto projects, I mean, they're global in nature. Can you talk a little bit about some jurisdictional issues that come up when it comes to crypto lending and projects based on crypto?
Yeah, so I think what I can comment on is from the insolvency perspective, what we've seen from FTX and some of the other insolvency cases. So if you're going to have a crypto insolvency where you're essentially a depositor lending into an institution, you could be from anywhere in the entire world where you're depositing funds. The internet just allows the ability to do business pretty much anywhere you want. If an insolvency occurs, there are going to be jurisdictional issues that are coming up, which if you're a depositor, you got to understand and you got to know before you deposit in an exchange that is in your own country. So, like, for example, FTX is the best to talk about. So in FTX, there's a there's an insolvency proceeding happening in the United States under Chapter 11 of their bankruptcy code. And I'm not a U.S. bankruptcy lawyer, but I understand enough to understand what's going on. And there's a liquidation process happening in the Bahamas as well for the international FTX entity. And there's been this jurisdictional battle between the two different proceedings in the United States and in the Bahamas, which is very, very interesting, over who should have control over the assets, where should the main proceeding be heard. And generally, when you have an insolvency that's cross-border, the United States and Canada is, the prime example for us. You'll have, one proceeding, which is the main proceeding in one country, and it's generally where the locality of the debtor is, where they do their main business. But sometimes arguments are made that it should be in the other proceeding, but that's generally what happens. And then you'll have an order recognizing the court decisions in the main proceeding in what's called a foreign jurisdiction. So let's say business is in Canada, most of their assets are in Canada, their employees are in Canada, but they've got some assets in the U.S. You'll have the main insolvency proceeding filed in Canada, and then the recognition proceedings down in the United States. And then the courts will work with each other, right, to ensure that the restructuring happens fluidly, the creditors and the stakeholders are all benefited as much as possible. Whereas in FTX right now, you have this battle that's been going on between the United States and the Bahamas. Originally, the two sides were saying, well, we're both the main proceeding. The American side was saying, we don't even want to send any information down to the Bahamian side, because right at the beginning of the insolvency proceeding, FTX International Bahamas sent $650 million of Bitcoin to the Securities Commission in the Bahamas. So the U.S. side was saying, what the heck is going on with the money? And their job is basically get everything under one roof, right? As the insolvency estate. So you get these jurisdictional issues that are actually very interesting in this case. The thing to be aware is that, if you are dealing with crypto all over the world, right? If you're sending money to one place in one jurisdiction, one place in another jurisdiction, you may have totally different laws on how their insolvency processes work, how enforcement processes work, how the securities commissions work. So, it's really important to get legal advice if you're going to be investing a lot of money. If you're an individual retail investor, it's really important to understand what country you're in, read the terms and conditions of the contract to know exactly what you're contracting into and what is happening with your digital assets if you're having an exchange hold'em or a different entity, because there are going to be jurisdictional issues that come up if there's a failure in the business, and that has been happening with these large scale exchanges in the United States. There's a lot of interesting issues that can come up if you're an insolvency lawyer. So,
and a lot of this stuff isn't set in stone yet, as we said earlier, or as we said in the previous question about the legal system lagging a little bit behind, right? So even on a international case, there's still a lot that's being thought
for
about.
Sure. Yeah, so there are new precedents being set every day, and so the most recent one that really intrigued me was in the Celsius case in the United States. As part of their Chapter 11 bankruptcy, there was a decision that came out which essentially said deposit holders who had put deposits into Celsius's what's called their earn account. It is essentially you deposit crypto in and you earn interest off of it. Were they unsecured creditors of the bankruptcy, or were those funds essentially being held by the exchange for them and they belong to the deposit holders? And the court, this isn't new law. The court looked at the terms and conditions of the contract. And if you read the case, the terms and conditions of the contract are pretty clear that the company would own funds that were deposited in and sitting in that earned interest account, because essentially what was happening was Celsius was taking that money, lending it out, getting a return on it, and then paying interest back to the earn holders. And the court said, one, the terms and conditions say that the company owns the funds. And two, if the terms and conditions are clear, you lent the money to them. So now it's created a debtor-creditor relationship. And they just owe you the money and you're unsecured. So it's unfortunate a lot of people are going to be unsecured and who knows what they're going to get. It's never going to be an unsecured creditor in an insolvency. But it created a sort of a concrete decision now to say, look, you got to read your terms and conditions. If you're putting money in exchange, understand what the exchange is going to do with those funds and understand what your rights are under them. Now, you have other situations where FTX said, "You're giving us this money, we're holding it, it's yours," in their terms and conditions, and then they went and backdoored the money and committed all these. They did all these things which are going to be tried in courts and being reviewed by the Securities Commission. But the allegations is that they backdoored everybody's funds, lost all the money, and Sam Bankman-Fried committed fraud.
This is very difficult for users, though, right? Like you look at those terms and conditions of any agreement, especially when it comes to securities and financial areas. Like, I mean, how many times do we download an app, and how many times do people actually read through
Yeah,
the 30 parts of legalese?
yeah,
Like it's hard, and I get it. This isn't just a crypto issue. This goes beyond that too, right? Any
yeah. And
contract,
I think you gotta, as a consumer, and this isn't legal advice, but you got to look at your terms and conditions. If you're downloading an app that's going to, for mindfulness, right? Reading those terms and conditions, the only thing that, there may be some privacy concerns, what they can do with your data, you know,
yeah,
it's not quite the same as, okay, I'm going to put, $10,000 of Bitcoin into this exchange and not
right,
knowing what
right.
rights you have in that money. In my view, you got to understand.
Yeah,
The,
yeah. So it's important to look at those for sure. I mean, and you are talking about people's hard-earned money here, right? So it's to your point, a little bit more due diligence required than downloading a mindfulness app or some game for your phone. So on that note, could you dive a little bit into that Quadriga case? Because that, I guess to your point, as these cases come through, like FTX as well, you begin to set some precedents with the courts, and then that's when the legislation gets put through. So maybe walk us through a little bit about that Quadriga case.
yeah, so there was a crypto exchange. It went insolvent in, I believe it was 2019, and it was being run out of the East Coast. And essentially, what was determined from the court report of the bankruptcy trustee, which was Ernst & Young, is that Quadriga was setting up a bunch of different accounts in different exchanges in different names, and they were getting Bitcoin sent to them, and they were sending out the Bitcoin into different exchanges and trying to leverage the Bitcoin, and they were essentially trading on it. And the market had a crypto winter that is generally happening every 4 to 5 years now in the space, and the price of Bitcoin tanked, and everybody's money disappeared. And what the exchange had been telling people was, okay, we've got your money, it's safe here, we're holding it for you, it's just being held, but in fact it was getting sent out into different exchanges and being traded. And there was a significant amount of money lost. With FTX, it doesn't seem that much now. I believe they were missing during the bankruptcy about $150 million that they couldn't recover. It seems sort of minuscule now with FTX, where they were talking about the billions of dollars. And the sort of the big controversy was that the owner of the exchange went to India, and he supposedly died in India. He got heat exhaustion, or he had some horrible sickness. He ended up in the hospital and died. And there's this conspiracy theory that he's actually alive and he took the money. And what was really interesting was that back in December, I think it was around the time FTX collapsed, a bunch of private wallets in Quadriga started activating and started moving funds years after. So there's this conspiracy theory that the owner started moving the funds around somewhere in the world. He's not actually dead. There was a court case to try to exhume his body, and so
Oh goodness.
yeah, it's like a Hollywood movie.
It's interesting because with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, I mean, that's how he made a lot of his wealth at the beginning. Was he was trading, like there was an arbitrage opportunity between the price of Bitcoin trading in the US and the price trading in Japan, right? And so he would trade on different exchanges and take the arbitrage. He would just do it at volume, which would then
Yes.
make him a lot of money. But I'm assuming in this Quadriga case, it was just more of disclosure about what was happening with people's money and what it was
Yeah,
being used for.
exactly. He was essentially, when there was the crypto boom and everyone was getting in on it, and he was probably one of the top exchanges in Canada at the time. And yeah, people just got in on it. They were making crazy returns, and it essentially was a Ponzi scheme what he was doing.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was taking people's money, trading it, and then taking other people's money and pushing it back to them. And eventually the funds ran out, right? Because he didn't have any new money to send back to people when they wanted to withdraw. And then after Quadriga, and frankly, why the Canadian system, like the Canadian crypto ecosystem for exchanges, didn't get hit the same way the US did when Terra Luna collapsed and 3 Arrows Capital, is after Quadriga, the Canadian Securities Exchange and the different provincial regulators stepped in and just like, we can't let this happen ever again. This was a disaster. So they really started clamping down on rules and how exchanges need to operate, and made it very stringent on becoming an exchange, and required a lot of due diligence to be done and questions to be asked. And they're very, very stringent before you can actually become regulated in Canada. And every province has a little bit different nuances too. Like Ontario is very stringent. Alberta is more crypto friendly because they want investment coming into the province. So the government's been crypto friendly. So it depends. But overall, Quadriga was sort of our FTX moment. And frankly, from a total market perspective, we're better off that it happened earlier than not, because I think if we were part of the FTX system of failures that have happened over the last 6-7 months, and we had exchanges kind of willy-nilly rules governing them, then people would be in there'd be a lot more pain happening.
I guess the trends in crypto and where kind of you see it from your perspective and from a legal perspective as well. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more regulation when it comes to crypto exchanges and anything dealing in crypto. But maybe talk about some of the other aspects of what you see as potential, where crypto is headed for the future, whether it's with Web3, metaverse, AI, that kind of stuff. Like what are things that you're kind of seeing as the upcoming trends for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think this year is going to be a painful year. I'm not sure the level of growth. There's definitely not going to be the level of growth like there was during COVID. During COVID, there was just so much money injected into the system, and money was so cheap that venture capital funds were just investing in everything. And I don't foresee that happening with the rate of interest rates and sort of what has happened to crypto over the last year. But I do think the industry is not going away. Like, it is established. There are large players that are very well governed, that are run very well, that have great managers, excellent C-suites, that are committed to being successful. So like, the industry is not going away. And there's this idea, I was asked this question at a conference about, is cryptocurrency going away? And I said, absolutely not. Like, it's not going anywhere. And I think there's a focus in sort of Western countries where we're so focused on ourselves and sort of what is happening in our industry. But you got to sort of look at in the next 40, 50 years, like world demographics as a whole, where you've got countries with like huge, large, young populations, whereas Canada, we've got an aging population, and the younger countries, like I'm going to use the example of Nigeria, that are basically adopting stablecoins as like a major form of currency because their governments are now putting in central bank digital currencies that they're forced to use, and they just don't trust the government. Like in Nigeria, I've read that the government has basically limited the right to pull more than $45 a day from ATM because they want to push their central bank digital currency, and now people are using stable coins that are pegged to the US dollar as sort of their means of exchange. So I don't see crypto as a whole and that ability to have freedom in your ability to transact go away in larger population centers. In terms of like the technology, I do think artificial intelligence is going to revolutionize basically not just crypto, but everything we do. You're seeing it on a daily basis what AI can do, and it's pretty incredible what the technology can do. I think AI and technologies like ChatGPT, I think they're going to be very useful and important in countries where we do have aging demographics and where we just can't rely on immigration to sustain population base, because you're going to need that technology to fill gaps where you just don't have the employment base to do certain types of work. And it creates a competitive advantage too, right? There's this human transition using technology has continually evolved for centuries. It's not going to stop, and I think it's a good thing. We're just continuing to evolve So I think I think the metaverse has had a lot of difficulties because it really was a function of COVID. Right. And people being stuck at home and having this uncertainty of what is life actually going to be like? Are we ever going to get out of this? I don't know where the metaverse is going to go. I think it's still too early to tell. I do think that both the way crypto is going in the metaverse, that it was really going to take, whether there's upcoming companies, new companies, or existing companies, like someone with really goodwill and reputation to basically step in and create the desire for people to want to use those technologies. In the US, for example, like I've had conversations with some folks in the crypto industry who are much more, who are who've been around for 10, 15 years, more knowledgeable than I am, who are they're foreseeing potentially established banks basically stepping in and trying to use stable coins, right? Because they're very efficient. You can run transactions very fast and there's a lot of fees that you can be generated. I think for the metaverse and NFTs, I saw Sony's actually gotten into using NFTs, and they're talking about cross-platform collateralization. So you can actually send NFTs across platforms, which would be amazing. Wow. You really need goodwill and reputation to actually, I think, people wanting to adopt. And if you're a new company, that takes a long time, right? It takes a long time to establish goodwill and reputation and consumer confidence. And if you're an established company, that is a large customer base, then you may have better handle on it.
Yeah. Well, I also think to your point, the big companies that have big consumer base, call it like Walmart, Amazon, when they start accepting crypto en masse, I think that's when you have full adoption, right? Until those big companies, until you can start buying things, your everyday goods with crypto, it's still going to slowly work its way. But I always feel that once those big retailers start being open to that, you see Elon Musk with Tesla, he's open to accepting Bitcoin to purchase Tesla vehicles. That's just the start. Awesome. Well, Sam, thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy, so appreciate you taking time to talk about this. It's such a fast changing industry, so we'll definitely need to have you back on, talk about this down the road here.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks everyone for tuning into this podcast episode. Make sure to follow and like our podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. Take care, and we will catch you in the next episode.